Welcome to the Gamut of Performance Podcast, episode 67. Before we start the show, I just want to take a moment and tell you all about my new book, The Gamut of Performance, The Young Strength and Conditioning Coach's Guide to Success. This book has been a work in progress, but it is finally complete and it's available on Amazon in the book section. It's right now it's only in a print copy. Decided not to go Kindle just because the format gets screwed up and I feel like it takes away from a lot of the author's work, so I don't think you'll be able to get the full effect. The purpose of the book, it's just for young strength and conditioning coaches. I think everyone can take a little bit from it, but it's specifically geared at the young strength conditioning coach. Like when you're starting in the field, you have no idea basically how to get in the field when you're on the outside looking in. So this book is just kind of a snapshot. It tells aspiring strength and conditioning coaches basically what they should know of in each different area. So a bunch of different areas, right? It gives you a quick snapshot of what you should know in those areas to either maximize your time or to attain an internship position or even a GA position or even an assistant position. I don't really think it matters. I think it exists to help people get to where they want to go. Okay. Each chapter is written by a different author that is very educated in all of strength and conditioning, but it's specifically in the area that they also have chose to write a chapter on. I don't want to keep you super long, but just to give you a quick overview of the table of contents, right? The first chapter is on education, basically what you need to know, should I go to school, certifications, things like that. The second chapter is going to be on coaching presence and relationship building. Third chapter on assessment. Fourth on programming and exercise selection and rationale. Fifth on warming up. Sixth on plyometrics and power development. Seventh on speed conditioning and energy system development. 8 on transfer of training. 9 on athlete monitoring. 10 on presenting yourself, and that's like application materials. 11, it's called Life is a Business. That's basically, the business of strength and conditioning, if we dive into a little bit more. And then 12 is kind of some other areas like how the field of strength and conditioning can change your life and where it can take you, right? So that's just a quick overview. Later on, we're going to dive deeper into author spotlights, right? You've heard from some of them, but I think it's important for you to be introduced to some of the ones that you haven't heard of. So thank you for listening to this, and let's kind of get right into the show. Coach Garrish, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciating you, taking the time out of your day and jumping on here and talking shop a little bit. So for the listeners at home, will you tell us a little bit about your background, kind of your motivation and where you are currently?
Sure. I'm the Director of Athletic Development at North Broward Preparatory School. It's in Coconut Creek, Florida. That's South Florida, Broward County. That's the county of Fort Lauderdale. So we're about an hour north of Miami, depending on the traffic, of course. But that's about where we are. We're a coastal Atlantic coast on the east coast of Florida. Been here for 5 years, just wrapped up my 5th year, starting on year 6 as the strength and conditioning coordinator. Again, the Director of Athletic Development is kind of how I've framed and phrased my title. Okay. Just in terms of like what we're looking to do and accomplish with our students. Yeah. I am in my 3rd year as the school's head track and field coach. Okay. Which I think we'll talk about a little bit later on. But that's been a big event for me. Taking over that program and being able to work with those kids, especially through the spring, has been an awesome opportunity. So just wrapped up my 3rd season there. But it kind of, as that has come, that's also how I treat the strength and conditioning program and our track program. My 12-month responsibility 100% is to all of our students on campus as their strength and conditioning coordinator. As a person that's there in the weight room. In the spring, so starting about end of January through May, depending on how well the season goes, that's when I put on my track hat. Okay. But I tell them once we start summer, track season's over, and we're focusing on whatever their next sport is. Most of our track kids are multi-sport, so that's kind of what has helped and made that transition really easy. Coming into the role as the head track coach. And that was kind of what we were thinking. We wanted to make sure that no matter what, nobody was going to be left out by that. Meaning teams that wanted to get in the weight room, students especially in their off-season training. So as a result, just about all of our student athletes, if you play another sport and it's not in the spring, and the spring is your off-season, quote-unquote, you're out on the track, which is a really, really cool dynamic that I've really enjoyed taking on. So that's really grown our strength and conditioning program naturally.
Okay.
Just because we get a lot of the students that were previously maybe on the track and not necessarily spending a lot of time in the weight room for one reason or another. And then on the other side of it, of course, it's a nice feeling knowing that our kids wanted to take part in our strength and conditioning program. But in many ways through the spring, because we're just a before and after school program right now. And I'll talk about what I do through the school day maybe later on. But for right now, our high schoolers, so I see our middle schoolers some during the day.
Okay.
Our high schoolers are before and after school. So knowing that after school time was essential for us from a strength and conditioning standpoint, it oftentimes coincided with track practice. So now the way that I organize that practice, nobody's missing lifts. We're probably lifting even at times that otherwise they were uncomfortable to, maybe the day of meets, maybe the day before meets, maybe the day after meets. That we are not going to miss our lifts, understanding that number one, a lot of our students play contact sports and keep up with that. But also I think it's essential for our track and field athletes too. So anyway, so then it also got, like I said, it got some of those track kids in the weight room, and that is just the perfect rolling stone to head into the summer. And get our summer program going, which is the biggest thing going for us. That's the time to spend, like I said, being a before and after school program. The summer is huge. So anyway, that's a short story long about my role at North Broward. Athletic career was an interesting one, especially at the college level. Okay. Played football just about all my life. Played a few other sports here and there, but football was kind of always, I guess, where I shaped my identity, unfortunately. Ended up going to play college football, had one too many concussions, and ended up taking on track. And, and in particular, the hammer throw was my favorite event leading in. So that led me to the University of North Texas, where I was actually as a grad student. I was at Wagner as an undergrad student. As a grad student, I got my 5th year of eligibility. 6th year, started as a graduate assistant under Frank Winchrick, Dave Trevino and staff at North Texas. Okay. Shortly after that, once I had graduated with my master's, I moved on to Rutgers to work with Jeremy Cole and Eddie Greer for a short time before getting a call to North Broward, which, like I said, it was 2014, 5 years ago. Okay. I got the call. It was actually close to home. It's actually the closest school to my house. I never lived in North Broward. It was right down the street from where I grew up. It could have happened. I could have got a call from anywhere. Probably. It was a buddy that called me and kind of gave me a heads up that they were hiring, but it could have been anywhere. And the fact that all the signs kind of pointed down here, and it's worked out exactly how you would hope a story like that happens, where you just kind of get a call out of nowhere. To take an interview, I wasn't sure of what the high school level was going to have to offer. I think like many coaches, I had a college mindset. And I didn't know what the high school level had to offer, and took advantage of it, and didn't know how long I was going to be here. And now I've been here 5 years, and I don't plan on going anywhere, man. This is where it's at. This is the dream job. Absolutely. There's nothing better than what I get to do every day. And I'm not just saying that. I'm not just blowing smoke. It is a incredible place with incredible people and incredible students.
That's really awesome to hear. And so let's dive into that a little bit more, right? So the high school strength coach mindset, a lot of people are still kind of scared of taking those positions, even though it's transitioning more towards those positions are becoming more prominent, right? There's getting a little bit more funding. The facilities are looking more and more like college settings. Will you talk about your mindset kind of coming in and what you had and what kind of adjustments that you had to make?
Sure. Well, I mean, you grow up as a student athlete, if that's the path you take. Obviously, that's not necessarily how you have to do it, but most strength coaches probably played a sport at one point or another. So you go up and you play Little League, whatever sport it is, and then the next level is high school, and then the next level is college, and then the next level is pros. And I guess that's kind of the mindset that I always had. And again, I think a lot of coaches have that same mindset that you get. I think when you're a high school student athlete and you have that dream of going to a certain school, you want these coaches coming to recruit you. It's a really, really awesome feeling, and it's a really awesome thing to see that when you're a high school student athlete. So again, you kind of have these aspirations of college sports, and that's probably getting deeper psychological of why that happens, psychologically why that maybe happens, and why a lot of us feel. But I think just based on funding, based on research, I think for the previous couple decades, from basically where started in its inception, strength and conditioning, especially in the States, has lived in college football in many ways. So I think that was kind of the mindset I took on. So even if, it wasn't necessarily professional and pro football was considered the big time, at least how I thought of it, I thought college football was the big time. As the cliche goes, I suppose, that was until I got to the high school level and I realized that's the big time. I'm telling you. When you start, if you think of funding, which that might be a piece we could talk about, but when you talk about level of athletes, if you consider what big time is based on big time athletes or based on big time resources, I think that's the complete flip of what our profession is about and what our identity as a profession is about and what our passion ought to be about. When you work and really, as many coaches say, as you start to realize the younger population coaches work with, it seems to be some of the better information they might have. And I don't mean necessarily that they're smarter, but if you can coach a 14-year-old girl that wants nothing to do with the weight room and wants nothing to do with you as a coach, or you could coach an 11-year-old that doesn't understand, that doesn't want to play a sport maybe, but is just doing something to do it and finds a new passion. When you can coach those type of kids, I think you can coach anybody. So when you realize that maybe the biggest challenges, and I think one of the most common myths about the high school level is it's easy. I don't think it's easy. I mean, I think the challenges are the greatest part of the job. And they're not challenges, like they're not lifestyle challenges. They're oftentimes not financial challenges either. I think there's a lot of, in many schools, there is funding for positions. That some of those challenges are what make the position so great. So, although, again, even I had that same mindset of kind of college is where it's at, work with the best athletes possible, and that's how you kind of identify as a good coach. I feel like I've grown a lot in working with the younger our students get. And in the last year, we've really even increased our middle school participation. And that's my group right now. Figuring out how to coach those kids and figuring out how to inspire those kids has been probably the best thing for me from a coaching standpoint.
That's really awesome to hear, and I couldn't agree more, right? Because when you're in college and pros, those athletes are more or less developed already, right? There's not a whole lot that you're gonna do that's gonna make them like better. There's things that you can do to mitigate, certain injuries or mobility, whatever. But at the high school, middle school level, that's where you're truly developing the mindset, the physical, literacy, all that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting. But kind of what you said, right, about funding, let's kind of dive into that a little bit more. So what does that look like in terms of, funding for the facility, funding for the coaches, things like that?
Sure. Well, I mean, it depends where you're at. Because the difference between maybe a public school and a public school in Florida, especially down by me in Broward or Dade County, where Palm Beach, Broward, Dade, I don't think there's a more talent-rich and talent-dense area in the country, speaking athletically. Among other things, of course, but I'm just speaking among young men and women that are coming up in sports. There's very few more talent-dense and talent-rich areas, I think, in South Florida. But besides the point, when you look at individual states and you look at how they support education, how and why really is the reasoning behind how they support education. I think it not only depends based on state, it also is going to depend based on school district. It also is going to, of course, depend on, the world between a private school and a public school is monstrous. In many areas. If you look in the states of Texas or Georgia, they have some opportunities. I think those two states are doing it really well right now. Among others, there's plenty of states. South Carolina's doing a great job. There's a bunch of states that are doing a phenomenal job from a standpoint of people in decision-making positions, creating opportunities for coaches to come on board, but also creating those opportunities for their kids. So funding could be tough. And again, it just depends on where you're at, because if obviously a hot topic of our profession is pay, especially for coaches that maybe aren't in the top dog position or a first assistant position. There are opportunities at the high school level that I think offer more than equal opportunity. But this thing hasn't even scratched the surface yet.
Yeah.
I mean, when school districts get on board, when individual schools get on board, the private schools are starting to, I think everybody gets it, or maybe not everybody, but I think a lot of people get it and understand the value.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, private schools are the ones that have the means to create the position.
Yeah. That makes sense.
But public schools, I believe, also do.
Okay.
And again, this is dependent on funding that comes from state tax. This is dependent on, of course, the decision making of the school district. But I think it takes kind of somebody shining the light at the opportunity, shining the light on both positives and I guess I don't want to say negatives, but the positives that can protect from the negatives. So when you start talking about liability, when you start talking about just safety in the weight room, that are obviously, I mean, it's first and foremost important that our students are safe, but it's keeping your school safe and away from lawsuits and things like that potentially could happen. Oftentimes, that's the language you have to speak, and I think that's not a language that strength coaches are always comfortable with and fighting for. I can certainly speak for myself on that, but it's something that's necessary and important. So when school districts get on board for that, if all states can kind of catch on with what some of the states that I mentioned are doing, just imagine if there was a position at every high school across the country, there'd be no more unemployed strength coaches. Which would be fantastic. There'd also be millions of young kids that have positive figures in their life. Like we know our profession stands for. I think we have some of the best people working in our profession. That high school age kids, middle school age kids really could benefit from the men and women of our field. And it just takes, fighting the good fight and growing our profession and doing the right things and providing an example for other schools to follow and other school districts to follow. That a lot of coaches have been doing for a long time. And it is it's a battle that'll take some time, but it's getting there. So, again, short story long, I think funding depends on where you're at. But there really is, there's the opportunity for public schools to create positions and really take care of families. When you think about some of the benefits of being in a school district, of being an employee, there are things that are there that oftentimes are a little bit more enticing maybe than taking some of those positions that I mentioned, the second, third assistant, and entry level position at the college level. Again, reconsidering kind of what the big time is.
No, I really like that, and I really like you kind of challenging that mainstream idea, right? Because still there's a lot of people that, they think the big time is working with that Power 5 school or that kind of thing, but then there's only so many of those jobs. So if we reframe, we can be, entrepreneurship is another one of the hot topics, right? And so looking at high schools and combining those, there's a millions of opportunities,
Of course.
So that's a really good way to think about it, right? And so tapping into this a little bit more, your daily kind of rhythm, right? You talked about it with the, kind of generally speaking, but what does a snapshot of your day kind of look like?
All right, so I'll start because we're in summer mode right now. I can start with summer. The way that I'm my inspired version of the tier system. So that's always been kind of an influencer in my programming. Still is. I think we've found ways to kind of manipulate it and make some changes that are adaptable and correct for our high school level athletes, even down to our middle school level athletes. When you start considering a block 0 and a phase and stage developmental program. So with that said, kind of our breakdown is always going to be a total body lift on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, with different emphases on whatever rotation of movements it's going to be on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So something that we're also able to do with our students at the high school level is our environment is completely voluntary. And I tell our students virtually, you have 5 day opportunities. You have 5 days of opportunity every week to come in and train. I promise the parents, there's nothing we're going to do. The last thing that I want to do is overtrain and hurt your kid. That's the number one thing we're not going to do. So when parents start to hear, because when parents hear they're going to train 5 days a week, they're like, oh no way, I'm staying away from that. Don't come in for 2 or 3. Monday, Wednesday, Friday are our lifts. Again, we go through a rotation of exercises, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays are going to be our typical speed, agility, quickness style days.
Okay.
That is going to be, obviously, all of our programming is going to be dependent on the time of year and the type of, and when we don't necessarily split up our programming nor our groups by what sport you play.
Okay.
But maybe season might dictate kind of where you're at, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So all of our students are training in a general fashion because they're young student athletes that hopefully are playing 2 or 3 sports for us. So when you consider a kid's playing 3 sports, maybe number one, they're in season all year long. Yeah. Probably even in the summer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Summer's probably when every coach is like, "Oh, I got him. I can crush him this time." Even though 5 different coaches are thinking about that.
Exactly.
So anyway, in many ways, it kind of takes on the path of an in-season program for many of those student athletes. But some of them do just compete solely in one time of year or another. And like we were talking off air, being the track coach, all of our multi-sport kids, if they're not playing a spring sport, like surprise, you're on the track team now, and you're probably learning a new event, which I think is really beneficial. I think it's been something that's really motivated our programming and motivated our daily schedule. So anyway, summer, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll split up 4 groups. I'll go a girls group to start. I'll go football/basketball. Everybody's busy in the summer, but football and basketball. And we're not a big school. We have our football program is probably 28 kids. Okay. It's probably more than that. It's probably about 40 kids, but 12 of those are international residential students. Gotcha. And the sport's new to them. They're not they're not coming over here being the next insert name here for an international level that's athlete that's made a name for themselves in American football. But so we're missing out on those kids in the summer because they're back home. Okay. Aside from that, being at the high school level, another cool thing is kids don't go home. They are home. They are home, They will travel and they will go on vacation, of course. And just like I said, we're a voluntary program. I encourage our kids, if your family has the means to travel and you can go on vacation, you'll never be 16 years old again. You only have 17 or 18 summers with your parents, right? Until you go off to college, and now it's a different type of feel. So parents know that too and appreciate that. So if you have a time to, if you can go away for a week, go away for a week. Yeah. However, you're also never going to get to be 16 again. This is the most fruitful time of your life from a developmental standpoint. You ought to be here. If it's vacation or workouts, go on vacation. Not all summer, hopefully. But if it's sleep in or workouts, you better be at workouts. That's kind of how I say it to the kids. So so we'll go ladies from the start in the morning, 7:30 to 9. Football and basketball start at 9. I'll go like a rotational sort of group for another boys group, which would be, and it's not going to change our programming too much, but our baseball, hockey, soccer, some of our other track kids that aren't football or basketball, will be in that group, and then I finish with a middle school group in the summer. Okay. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're limited to field space. We have to be off the field by 9 a.m. Okay. We have a camp that comes in and they're partnered with us, and they have the field space for the summer. So they just ask that we be off the field by 9. Okay. My thinking is we get off the field before it's way too hot out there for our kids. We get off the field at South Florida, so it's going to rain every single afternoon. So we get off the field before it does that. Okay. And it provides an opportunity to bring all of our students together. So at 7:30, anyone in those 4 groups is coming out to the field. Yeah. And we're training in it. It's almost like a field day out there. Yeah. We've got kids all ages. It's so cool to see college-bound rising senior football players that are going to play FBS football, teaching a 6th grader some shuffle mechanics, or playing rock, paper, scissors with a 6th grader. Yeah. Or we've got a mix of everybody out there, boys, girls, doesn't matter the sport. Yeah. And the way that I kind of rotate those days is right now we're doing predominantly linear and multi-directional. I might have a day maybe that we've got to scale some things back a bit, and we might go just a recovery day, regen day, and we might go a straight up competitive day, which will probably incorporate linear and lateral concepts. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the summer. Okay. And 5 days. My programming throughout the year doesn't change much. So knowing that knowing that we're operating under an emphasis of total body lifts on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, depending on what sport you play or depending on if you're in season or not, it's not going to change much. Tuesdays and Thursdays are still going to be our, it just depends on what we're looking to accomplish. It's still kind of linear and lateral.
Okay.
Maybe towards the end of the fall, we start thinking track a little bit, so it's a little more linear. But depending on if you're in season, you might just be training 2 of those days. And that might depend on what the coach wants to accomplish. In season training, meaning like the coach is going to give me 30 or 45 minutes. That's when it's going to be specific to a group. Now, there might be other individuals that say they want to come in and train when the basketball team trains, but they're in season. That's perfectly fine. But I kind of follow suit. So we'll have 2 morning groups. In the fall, it happens to be sports. So it's going to be boys soccer, and anyone can join them if they want. It's just kind of how we promote it, I guess. Yeah. And baseball. And in the afternoon, I'll have a girls group, a boys group, and then an in-season group, depending on what sport wants to train that day.
Okay.
So, that's kind of what our general breakdown is. Yeah. Throughout the school day, this year was the first year that we added a middle school class. It's just kind of a block 0 style, like introduction to strength and conditioning. We call it our general fitness class. Next year, we're actually adding another. It was incredibly successful on campus. It was well received. Yeah. Personally, there were times that I thought, I don't want to say a disaster, but anytime I feel like I'm unprepared, it's a disaster. And it wasn't that I went into it unprepared. I don't think I was just prepared. It's like when I was at Rutgers, I got a call from North Broward. I thought, you know what? I see all of these guys that are coming in that are potentially, college, rising freshman college football players to be. That are either, trained in the wrong manner growing up, and now it's the college strength coach's turn and responsibility to kind of break those bad habits and help them recover from some of those injuries, or that they had never been in the weight room, which I'm sure, speaking to college coaches, more often than not, they probably prefer a kid that hadn't been in the weight room to somebody that had just been overcoached and trained coming in. So what you think is like, oh man, I could go to the high school level and fix all the world's problems, prepare all these guys and gals for college level athletics, and I'm going to design this program that prepares them for that, and it's going to be awesome. And then you realize they come to you in 9th grade, and it's not going to be necessarily the same, shoulder or injuries of that, but it's going to be, they haven't hopped, they haven't skipped, they haven't bounded, they haven't done all of these general athleticism skills, and they haven't practiced and played with these skills because kids are just growing up in a different way now. So kind of, again, figuring out what the big time is and kind of working our way back to figure out how early we can get to these kids. Yeah, that influence, Yeah, exactly. And just, I think at the lower school, at our elementary school, I think our PE teacher is the best in the world. Yeah. And that's ultimately what it takes there. Yeah. They get to see all these things. Okay. And they get to just play. So figuring out again, thinking that maybe when I first started working with high schoolers that they're young college athletes. Yeah. And it took maybe a year to figure out, wait a second, no, they're not. I think the middle schoolers, same thing. Like I thought, we're going to bring out some PVCs and go through our squat progression. Yeah. Spend 30 minutes working on our squat pattern, and then within 30 seconds, they're swinging the PVCs at each other and just want to play. They're kids, So, I think that's something that I'm still getting familiar with and still trying to get better at. Yeah. So in that light, I don't feel as it was a huge success last year. I think this year is going to be a lot better, but the reception on campus has been fantastic. Yeah. I think it's going to be a big source of growth for us moving forward. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that you're kind of creating that resource and giving them that option is huge, Whether or not they take it, that's going to be a work in progress, but the fact that it's there is already a big deal. So that's really interesting. And then moving forward a little bit, right? We talked briefly about training and the structure. Do you have any kind of like key performance indicators for that, or how does that look at the high school level? I think from a testing and assessment point, I've always been inspired by track and field. And I think that oftentimes it does go back to our athletic and competitive experience. I think probably in high school, you do the, combine style testing, and that's what you want to do. And probably it has more so maybe from a 1RM standpoint in the weight room. My training in the weight room has been greatly inspired by the APRE.
Okay.
So I don't really feel the need to have max out testing days. Yeah. We're not really percentage based anyway.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily a necessity. So kind of what then has made me think is still, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. Yeah. So what are we really trying to, what carryover are we trying to see, and what carryover are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
So some of the things we look for from a sprinting standpoint, at least from a linear standpoint, and I can go through my tests if that's good with you.
Yeah.
Number one, I'll start with Tony Holler, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with. I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with. If they're not, I strongly suggest you look into his Feed the Cats model and method, because that's another thing of, well, can we not assess every week? Can we not assess every day?
Yeah.
Is there a time and place for it almost every day in our daily program? And I think from a sprinting standpoint, I think it absolutely is. Every day we sprint, not necessarily 5 or 7 days a week. Every day we sprint, I think we can time at least one sprint.
Okay.
I think when we have large groups, oftentimes that dictates how much we do, but especially in the summer, when we're in track season, that's what we're doing. Our sprint workouts are sprints, and we're timing our sprints. In the summer, it just depends on kind of how many kids we have, which, like I said, it can be a lot.
Yeah.
So maybe we're just timing one sprint, and that's kind of the method of feeding the cats, of giving them something that they're excited about, giving them something that they'll be fresh with. That doesn't mean we're just running one sprint and going home. We're working on our mechanics, and we're working on some other things as well.
Okay.
But it's an important piece for us. So throughout the summer, we're timing a 40 once a week, and the 40-yard dash is not my favorite. It is not something. It is actually something that I combated and battled for 4 years.
Okay.
Until listening to Tony Holler speak, until listening to Ken Clark speak, and think too. If I'm a high school athlete, I can run 30-meter dashes, which was one of the tests. It's still one of the tests that's important to me. And again, that's kind of like if you're looking at some typical track methods of assessing, oftentimes a 30-meter dash is in there. And we timed the 30-meter dash for 4 years. And then every time we tested it, can you guess what question I would get from the kids? I would get, what do you think that would be in my 40?
Oh, yeah, and classic. Yep.
It's like, all right, well, maybe it is something that would encourage our kids to, because they know. They sprint. They say, hey, coach, what did I run? Well, you ran a 7.4.
Yeah.
And, coach, that's not very good. Or you ran a 4.7.
Yeah.
Hey, that's pretty good, So the kids know what it is.
Yeah.
It's a value that is something that they're looking to and seeking to attain. There's a goal in front of them, and we can we can get their blood flowing on a weekly basis just by telling them we're timing this. And you're not going to get a kid to. If I tell a kid sprint at 100%, they're probably going to sprint at 88%.
Yeah.
If I put a stopwatch on them, they're going to sprint with all they got.
Exactly.
That's been an important piece. So I'm sorry to get off track there, but certainly linear sprinting is going to be an important piece for us when we time our 40. So that distance might also change in track season. Like I said, through the summer, I'm keeping it with 40 because I want the kids to know every week this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
This is what I want. I can't wait to run the 40 again on next Tuesday because I'm going to beat my time.
Yeah, it's competitive now. Yeah.
Correct. So another thing that we have used, a linear sprint drill that has been, or distance that has been important for us, is a 30, 60, 90. So basically it's a 90-meter sprint, which is 99 or 90, 99 and some change yards.
Yeah.
So I kind of just tell them think of it as 100 yards. But 30 meters, 60 meters, 90 meters. I'll be the person that takes the 90 meters. I'll put a coach, hopefully a consistent coach at the 60-meter mark, and I'll put a consistent coach hopefully at the 30-meter mark.
Okay.
We don't necessarily have timing gates. We have stopwatches.
Yeah.
So it's not ever going to be perfect, but we try to make it as close to perfect as possible. Kids running 90 meters. The coach is just at 30 is taking their 30 split. The coach at 60 is taking their 60 split. I'm taking their 90 split. Looking looking at, what the three things that we're training and, with the meaning acceleration, top speed, and speed endurance. So I've been thinking, because we've kind of liked this 40-yard dash, going 40, 80, 120 in yards. And that might be something, we're not necessarily testing this in the summer. That'll be something we revisit once track season comes around.
Okay.
But we might go that route, and I want to see because it allows me to break down the percentages and see where we start to lose some steam. And again, it's not going to be perfect because we're on stopwatch, but it's a pretty cool tool, and it's pretty cool to play with, and pretty cool to see, hey man, you're way more than a third in that last 30 meters. Yeah. Maybe speed endurance is a necessary trait
that we need to work on. Yeah.
Characteristic that we look at. And again, that's kind of talking more towards track season.
Okay.
Med ball throws are very important to me as well.
Yeah.
Between the legs forward, between the legs backward, or overhead back, as maybe Dan Paff or some other track coaches would call it. And then we'll do a chest pass as well, like a power throw, a kneeling power throw.
Okay.
As far as jumps go, we don't have a vertec, but we have a form of testing or measuring at least a max height jump, which is it's kind of hard to explain without having it in front of me. But we hang a tennis ball over our rafters. We have a way to measure it and mark it up and count it down. That's something actually I have 8 of them that we've made, and that's actually another thing that we use. If I'm going to tell a kid to jump for max height, we're going to jump for max height. Landings get a little funky. So I keep the volume low. But we're in a controlled environment, and things aren't always cued out on the court. And that's not to say we want to put kids in a position where they're vulnerable. But we keep volume very low. Aside from that, we'll work some jump patterns that we focus on landing. Jumps, sprints, throws, those are our big ones. Those are our big ones. Well, from a speed endurance standpoint, or conditioning test, like we're not going to do a conditioning test. Often, sometimes our coaches will ask for a conditioning test. If it's something that they really want, and it makes sense, and it's not going to put our kids in a dangerous position, we'll do it. But aside from that, all-time kids in a 300-meter run as well. That'll be, again, more towards track season. That's kind of a more important facet or factor that I want to look at in track season. Hopefully that covered all of them. I think. Also, our speed power. We're not looking too much. Again, like I said, 300 potentially, but aside from that, we're not looking too much concern with our endurance testing. Also, from a standpoint of strength testing, we're not necessarily so focused on that either.
No, I like that, and all those things that you kind of listed are things that they would probably encounter in sport, in one sport or another. So I really like how you made it very applicable. So now they can say like, oh, why do we test this? Because you're going to use it in X and O sport, right? And then the same thing with conditioning tests. Conditioning tests, a lot of mechanics just break down. So it's it's like, what are you really measuring? What are you really pushing forward? So I think that's a really important good trait, which is kind of unique to the high school level. College level coaches have their conditioning tests, whether you like it or not. It's just it is what it is. And so I think that's another cool thing.
At the end of the day, we prepare our kids to hopefully, do well and succeed at their sport. That also goes towards the coach. Like, if our kids' confidence is probably going to be shot if they do have a conditioning test and they go out and fail. So there still is some degree of preparing for a test and training to a test, which is something that we want to avoid. And it's something that I think our coaches and I have developed a strong enough relationship that we can. We're all on the same page. In many for the most part.
I like that. And so with coaching cues, right? So you got all kinds of different age groups, and obviously there's a lot of research on like external cueing and things like that. What have you found to be useful in terms of like working with these different age group kids, right? Because I'm assuming that external is just not going to stick just because that's what the research says, No,
that's awesome, man. Actually, I found if there's one thing, words don't always work. I want our kids to a big thing that I say is feel it, don't hear it. Like, there are cues. There certainly are cues that are going to help somebody. I think some kids, maybe you and I are doing a sprint drill, or we're just straight up sprinting, or maybe you and I are squatting, or maybe you and I are cleaning, or whatever the movement might be. That an external cue might work for you, an internal cue might work for me. But when you're talking about potentially seeing, 80 to 120 kids, just echoing cues isn't always going to be the approach that we go for. Also, in the instance of myself, many high school coaches do have multiple coaches on staff. I've had a few instances where I've had brilliant outstanding volunteers.
Uh-huh.
Certainly during track season, I think I have some of the best coaches around.
Okay.
But throughout our strength and conditioning program, it's usually just me.
Okay.
Some of our sport coaches still come out and help,
Yeah.
and they're awesome too. But oftentimes it's going to be like, it's going to be a different idea of cueing. You might still hear some cues even from our sport coaches that aren't necessarily ones that I'd go with on a daily basis. So I think, coaches sometimes see what we do at North Broward, especially from a sprint standpoint, especially from that's probably the big thing, or really, I don't think there's not much variety in our program for the sake of variation. Okay. The reason for some variety, I think, or the reason for some of the unique things that we do, I try to model our program in something that is more similar probably to a motor learning and skill acquisition approach. Okay. And I know that sounds like I'm just like throwing out those big words, and that means we're going to go out and play tag. And that's not to belittle that idea. It's a very important idea for me. But oftentimes the drills that we use some tactile cueing that is going to be not necessarily, and I mean that not necessarily my words, I mean literally the feel that the students have. It might be a hand position on their hip. And again, I'm just speaking sprinting right now because that's kind of like, that's the lens that I see through. Okay. But oftentimes, like you start thinking of, we're thinking of a 6th grader versus a 12th grader. Some word might resonate different for that 12th grader than it will for a 6th grader. Yeah. If I let them feel something and say, do you feel that? Do you feel, again, it's kind of hard to demo without having the opportunity to demonstrate. But we do some sprint drills, and we straight up sprint with our hands on our waist. Okay. And many people think it's just to maybe take the arm down it, or it's, maybe for no reason at all. There's an absolute reason behind it. First, we start them with, we put their hands on their waist, and we tell them, and they're standing up and they're still, and we tell them to basically do an in-place hands-free knee hug, where they bring their knee up and they tuck their heel to their butt. And I say, okay, what do you feel on your hand? And usually they'll say either my hand tilts up or I feel a pinch on my fingers. And then I'll tell them, kind of do like the Little League first time you ever learned how to do a butt kick, where you kick your heel way behind you. And tell me, what do you feel on your hand? And I'll say, I don't feel much of anything. Nothing happens to my hand. And then we'll go into a sprint drill, and I'll say, you want to feel what happened in that first application, if that makes sense. So again, I know that's hard to demonstrate and that's hard to explain, but then we use PVCs, and it's, you want to feel this on the PVC. It's, I think there's a lot more that can be said, and maybe those words, the words that ought to be construed, are construed towards feeling. If that makes sense. So we found that a lot of things, like if I can put an athlete in an environment or a situation or a position, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, and they can feel the change that we're trying to make, or feel what we want to say, because I'm not really good with my words anyway. Especially when you're talking, like when you first start working with kids and you don't know what is going to resonate with them. I think kind of locating and finding what maybe is I don't want to say a hindrance, but maybe not necessarily a strong suit for me yet, has kind of led me in the direction of using a lot of those tools, if that makes sense. So a lot of our learning progressions, a lot of our just progressions that we go through have that in mind. Like, even from the start, what do you feel versus cueing of whatever it may be? Cueing a single leg RDL has always been something that I've struggled with. However, if we put them in a position with a PVC and with a reach, now all of a sudden
things are starting to click. No, I think that's really important as well, right? Because if you can feel it, then you can replicate it. Correct. And it's a lot of times. What's that?
No, I said ideally.
Ideally, exactly. Because a lot of times if you give a cue and the kid gets it for one time when you're there, and then what happens when they're on vacation or something like that. So I think that's another important point. And so you touched on the fact that as far as like the coaches that you have working with you, or the sport coaches that sometimes help. So what does that look like, and how are you able to kind of manage that so everyone's kind of going in the same direction?
in track season, that's the one that I can speak towards. Really, if it's out of season or if it's with a particular sport, the coach is coming to be a set of eyes and make sure everything's kind of safe and secure. There's not much. I don't want to say there's not much coaching going on from them, but it's more so from a kind of just
ratio
and safety of the student. When we're working with our track coaches. Which I suppose if one day I'm able to have a full staff, and this is kind of how I think track actually, as I'm saying this, is a good sport to teach staffing for our strength and conditioning coach. Reason being, the skills in the event are similar, at least from a KPI, from a just skill or strong suit strength standpoint. Most every track athlete is going to benefit from getting faster. Their events are going to benefit from that. There, of course, are some events that are going to take a lot more specificity than that. But point being, it's a sport that myself as the head coach and myself as the director for the sprints in particular, I'm going to see all of the kids, and we're all going to go through a sprint workout regardless. However, when it's time to get down to our events, it's time to let the coaches do what their strength is, and it's time to let the coaches do what they're comfortable with. And it's time to certainly get out of the realm of micromanagement, if that makes sense. So I think an important piece for me, if I'm looking to build a staff, it's in making sure everybody's on the same page, of course. If you have a coach that doesn't think that getting faster is a benefit to the team, that automatically, like if sprinting isn't the center of our track and field program and somebody's not on board with that, that's as good as saying that my strength program sucks in the weight room. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is, meaning from an assistant strength and conditioning coach. Like, it's a bad look. So we have to be all on the same page. And from a strength and conditioning standpoint, we certainly all have to be on the same page. The reason why we're sprinting, the reason why we're working through our change of direction ought to be the same reason that we're not necessarily the same training intent, but ought to be the same reason that we're training in the way that we do in the weight room. Ought to be the same reason that we're training in the way that we do, or at least fueling our body. Like, all of these things ought to be for the same intent of becoming better athletes on the field or on the court or on the track, whatever it may be. So what I mean by that is finding coaches that have strengths maybe that are different from yours. Like I said, to compare it to track, I can't coach the hurdles. But I think I have the best hurdles coach in the state, and he knows what he's doing, and I'm going to let him do it. So I want to seek to find the best. If I'm a more comfortable kind of weight room guy, I want to find the person that's comfortable with the field work. If I'm a person that's more comfortable out on the field, or I'm a person that maybe just has a different strong suit. Like, there's so many different strengths that we find both in our programming and kind of just direction of training, from our personality to how we relate with kids, the kids that we identify with and can relate to. And we can, because I think one of the best coaches I ever had as a volunteer, meaning in our strength and conditioning program, probably was the one with the least education, especially from a strength and conditioning standpoint, but he was able to connect with the kids that I couldn't. And I think that was a really, really important piece. And that, again, especially if that person can relate to that kid in a way that has nothing to do with strength and conditioning, and they have deep conversations and important conversations about life, and then that person tells you how great the program is and how important it is to buy in, you got that kid for life. You got that kid certainly for the time that you have with them. So I think finding people that can relate to different students, finding people that have different strong suits. You don't want just like to be a speed guy and just hire a bunch of speed guys because they're going to agree with you. Like, what's going to happen in the weight room? You know what I mean? And obviously everyone has a good knowledge of a bit of everything, but finding somebody, it's really hard to stretch ourselves to know everything about everything. So
so covering your blind spots. Covering those blind spots, huh?
For sure. Absolutely.
No, I like that. Okay. And so you talked about some volunteers, right? So how does that look as far as like getting volunteers, interns, and what does continuing education look like for you as a professional, right? And some of those volunteers that you might have.
Sure. I think I want to start with the point of continued education for me, which it has not flipped. Like, obviously, like, I think we still have a profession that does better than most, better than anyone that I've talked to in other professions from a continued education standpoint, with all of the opportunities that we have, from coaches that are willing to share to traveling opportunities to network at not only conferences but with other coaches. We're a very open door society, I think, from a strength and conditioning standpoint, which is awesome. The best thing that I think has happened to me from that standpoint is coming to the high school level, because I can connect with teachers. Like, when you find a good teacher, when you find I'm speaking of someone in particular, if you find an 8th grade teacher that can get students so fired up for history that's why they want to go to school in the morning, that is fantastic, because that was the last reason I wanted to go to school. You know,
exactly.
Like, if you find teachers that really connect with and inspire their students, connect with those people and mirror those people and use those people for the strength of your program and the growth of your program. Like, that has been one of the best things that has happened for me working at high school and, again, middle school. And then when you start talking about our lower school and elementary school teachers, I think that, you know, that the teachers have such a special heart to want to do that for pay that is not spectacular, and they're just in it for the kids, and inspiring the kids. Like, you could learn so much from those teachers. So I think that's been a very important piece. And even for college coaches, I would encourage them to like we look for entrepreneurs, we look for coaches at our level and different levels. Like, look to teachers, because they are absolutely the gatekeepers, the door openers, more so is probably the better term, for our kids and just how they're inspired. So that's something for me. I think you had asked just about, like, volunteers. I would like to say that we have a long-lasting relationship with universities locally. There are a few, and there are a few that we've had great experiences in the past. We just don't have a consistent and continuous like a stream semester-week deal. One concern for me on that end is, like, undergrad students with high school kids is just something you ought to keep precaution on. So that does kind of, like, that does cause hesitation. Just because it doesn't matter. An interview could go great. It's still, ages are close. You know what I mean? So age is close. So that's something that we consider. So more often than not, the volunteers that I've had have been connections through social media, connections through other coaches that have really given a character reference and somebody that I trust. More often than not, I've gotten way too lucky with the volunteers I've had. Like, people that have, you know, from CSCS to just bottom line, just as qualified in a few instances, many instances. Nearly all the instances, even more qualified than myself to work with our kids and work in the capacity that I do. To have people like that'll just volunteer their time,
it's awesome.
Was just really, really incredible. That they've helped immensely, but those are not easy to come by. So we probably 1 to 3 a year. I would say summer's kind of the time where I lean on people more. We actually don't have a volunteer right now, but oftentimes the best few summers we have had. And then in track season, even though we have a bunch of event coaches out there, it always helps to have a volunteer. And when I look for volunteers, I look for assistant coaches, because it's just me. So I want to find somebody, again, that can relate to those kids that I can't, that can design something in our program that maybe isn't my strength, that is going to benefit our kids. That's what I'm looking for.
I like that. Okay. And so on that same vein, right, so what are some general format tips that you have for, like, resumes and cover letters?
Oh,
it's a tough one.
It sure is, especially because I haven't updated my resume in 5 years, which is a good sign. It's obviously you ought to be prepared, but it is a good thing on my end. I think, and it might sound like I'm dodging this answer or question, and maybe I am, but I think the direction that we ought to be going is not necessarily about resumes and cover letters. I think it's like, I think social media usage is everything right now, and I really think I was talking to a mom who had her 8th grade daughter next to her. We were talking about the same thing. I don't know how it came up. I think we were just talking about social media.
Yeah.
And I said it's really our living, breathing resume.
Yeah.
There's nothing, I think we should get out there, just like maybe we shouldn't have a 8-page long resume.
Yeah.
But we ought to list our experiences that are applicable to the position.
Yeah.
So I think we can do that through our social media usage. And one of the things that I said to the mom was, actually, when the time is right for her daughter to join social media, it's going to be a good thing for her if we use it the right way.
Yeah.
And I said that she's probably actually never going to make a resume.
Yeah.
Because I think there's going to be different methods of like what your history is, what your work history is, and who the person you are is.
Yeah.
And the daughter on cue said, "What's a resume?" And I think really that is, we have a personal branding class on campus, and as I said, like identifying and locating and connecting with teachers on campus, and seeing like what the next generation is going to be about. And I think so from a format standpoint, like share what you've done, don't go over the top, make sure it's applicable to the position. Something that's pretty and concise and formatted goes a long way. Yeah. It's just like our personal appearance. You know what I mean? It goes a long way when it comes on our desk. But I think just like taking captive the social media scape and landscape, I think is really important, because we can, we also always have a hesitation to put ourselves out there out of concern and fear for being labeled a self-promoter. There comes a point where there needs to be some selfishness to that, and there needs to be some like, hey, this is my resume, this is what I've done, and that's not saying you ought to go on and tweet and say I do this, I did that, but sharing things and letting people in on who you are, especially who you are as who you want to be and who you want your future boss to think you are. Like share. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with sharing times with family. There's nothing wrong with sharing times with significant other. Obviously, again, if it's appropriate. There's nothing wrong with sharing your interactions with your students, with their parents, with the teachers. So again, I hope it doesn't sound like I'm dancing around that answer, because it is something that's important to me, and it's something that's meaningful to me. But I think that goes a long way. I think future employers and decision makers are going to see a resume, and probably I would guess at this point most everyone is putting their social media handles on there. I would, and whether you do or don't, they're still going to go.
They're going to find it.
They sure are. They're going to find you, and that's probably going to go a longer way towards your potential hire than what's on paper. Yeah,
that's a really interesting take, and I think it's really important to consider as well, because like you said, we're moving towards that direction whether we like it or not. So that's really good. Okay, what are some resources that have had a big impact on you, whether it's like a book or a podcast or a conversation?
I mentioned Tony Holler.
Okay.
I think the members of the National High School Strength Coaches Association are incredible. I think that's an organization that everybody should look into. I think there's content sharing there. There's just incredible people in the organization that I think it's important to reach out to them. I can go into some kind of sprint specific. Altus is incredible, and I don't think Altus is just sprint specific. And I realize that they are kind of track driven, and that's the mindset. But I think they have some fantastic ideas, just approaches to human development that are really helpful to coaches. Same goes for, like, you can go back to reading some Charlie Francis. I'll never be bad for you. Other resources, those are probably the big ones.
Okay.
I know I'm missing somebody, but those are usually where I start and usually who I suggest.
Okay. I like it. Awesome. Okay. And then moving forward a little bit, right? So if you have any, what are some quotes that you live by?
Some quotes that you live by. Fred Eves told me a long time ago, and I thought this was one of the most impactful things that I had heard, especially for young coaches that are listening: be countercultural. And I know that's not like a big saying, that's not a huge quote. And I think we're going to talk about kind of lessons in a second, but that's sort of like that's something that I think especially young people ought to live by. You can say, and And really, whatever it is, maybe another way to put it is be your own person. Like, don't just fall into whichever way the society's going. Don't just fall into inappropriate social media usage.
Yeah. Don't
just fall into bashing other coaches because it seems like the right thing, or taking the easy way out.
Yeah.
That seems to just be kind of, and I don't think necessarily our entire culture identifies with those. I don't think our generation identifies with those.
Yeah.
Regardless of what some might think. Like, kids don't want to be lazy. Like, their objective in life is not to say, I'm going to be lazy, I'm not going to care about anything. All kids want to be inspired, and they see it in you. So if you just kind of follow the ways of the world, and you kind of just go with the flow, kids are also going to be like that. If you kind of just let them go with the ways of the world and follow the culture, they're going to do the same. So I think setting a standard for yourself and setting an example for your kids by being countercultural, especially as young coaches, I think will go a long way, not just in your own life, but in the leadership of whatever age your students are.
I love it. Okay. Is there a thought or experience from your past that you've held on to that's made a big difference in your life now?
Thought or experience. Certainly, like, through the time of my injuries and such, I think that was one of the big things that, obviously from a personal level, from an individual level that I talk to with a lot of our students, is forming your identity in something other than your sport. Or forming your identity in something other than, like, what you're just good at.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, your skills are not your identity. The sport you like to play is not your identity. The position that you play is not your identity. Who you are on campus isn't even your identity. Because when you do that, and obviously for other reasons, I mean, just making the people around you better. If you just say, usually when you say I'm a football player, it comes with a sense of arrogance. Usually when you say I'm an A student, I'm a whatever SAT, I'm a future Ivy League student. Like, obviously those are incredible things to have as part of your experience and slightly form and create your identity. They are not the only source of it. So not to get preachy, but before I had those injuries, I formed my identity as a football player. And when that's taken away from you, you're crushed. So if you have that, your career transition, your life transition is going to be brutal. You're going to turn into a person that you don't want to be. Thankfully, you have some good people around. I had some fantastic people around. And kind of a sport that helped me kind of ease that transition and that process out of being a competitive athlete. So if you just, if you're identifying as a Division I college strength coach, like, one day, none of us, it's very rare that we retire as one.
Exactly.
And it's even more rare that we die as one. There's going to be a time after. Who are you? And not forming that identity. So I think that experience to me changed my life, and hopefully it also has influenced our kids, because it's something that I kind of try to express to them on a daily basis, really. Even though we might talk about we want to be the toughest guy on fourth down, we want to be the girl that finishes the 400 strong, and that's kind of our mindset for training, and that's what it gets us going. When we're done, hey, remember your Jessica, remember your Chris, remember who your family is, remember who your friends are, remember why you're who you are. So I think that's an important piece that's definitely shaped who I've become.
I like that. Okay. What is the best advice that you've ever been given?
I think this is where I was talking about. It kind of goes back to the being countercultural, and being a person that, just stands for something. I think that's an important piece. I think it's easy to say. I think sometimes I certainly struggle with it. I think it's something that I work on a daily basis and try, but at least stressing it to our kids. Being a person that stands for something, like, especially at the high school level, you see things like, you never know the impact that you're going to make in a person's life. Like, you don't realize, and again, this goes back to, like, being careful with identity, but you don't realize how cool it is for the starting quarterback to come eat lunch with you if you don't have any other friends. You know what I mean? Like, be okay with being that person. And maybe this is more so advice that I give to our kids, and in many instances, maybe I wish I was given this advice when I was younger. But it's just, like things like that, like simple things like that. You never know the impact you can make on somebody else.
Yeah.
Don't lose sight of that,
Mm-hmm.
and take it with a grain of salt, but also take it and run with it and own it, because it is something that you can make a much greater impact in somebody else's life than you probably think just by saying hello to them.
Yeah. That's huge.
And also, I will say, and this is not just blowing smoke, our kids do a fantastic job with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably more so them showing me that example,
Yeah.
which is, when you get the experience to go to work on a daily basis and learn from a 15-year-old kid how you ought to live life, it's pretty cool to see. So I learned some things from them that kind of have become good advice too.
That's awesome. I love it. So in contrast to that, what's the worst advice that you've ever been given?
Don't take a high school job.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I did have a few people tell me that, and for a variety of reasons. With some people that I'm still such close friends with, and are still big time mentors of mine. If you take a high school job, you're never going to want to leave it. But if you take a high school job and you have different aspirations, it's not over. And you're not going to get, I think one of the things maybe that a coach said early on or before I took the job is like, you're going to get complacent or something like that. Or it's easy to get complacent at the high school level. Well, no, the heck it's not. It's up to the person. And like I said, there are challenges on a daily basis. There are not challenges of, I'm worried if I'm going to lose my job tomorrow because we lost the game on Friday night. There's challenges of like things that wake you up in the morning and really get you fired up to go to work. A kid that otherwise would never, ever go anywhere near a weight room, or they don't play any sports and they just want to be a part of your strength and conditioning program, or like I said, those young men and women that have a great impact on campus and in the future in a greater scale on society, and teaching them, kind of showing them the ropes, or trying. There's challenges on a daily basis. There's challenges of helping young men and young women become the person that maybe they don't know they want to be yet. So you won't get complacent. It's not easy. It's not an easy job. I think some coaches that fail going from the college level to the high school level, not necessarily fail, just don't enjoy it, don't like it. It's because they think it's going to be easy, and it's not. It's not a early retirement. It's not a ride off into the sunset. It's hard work. The kids can be a challenge in a super positive way, but it certainly isn't easy. And I know vast amounts of people on campus. I'm not saying just in our athletic department, but teachers that maybe you could get complacent. And maybe you don't necessarily have to worry too much about your job security, but they absolutely do not. So that's probably that's a few pieces, all relating kind of to going down to the high school level.
Okay.
It absolutely is not.
Fair enough. Okay, and then last question here to kind of round it out. What are some projects that you're kind of currently working on, and how can people kind of reach out to you and follow your journey?
Social media is the best way to reach out. I love Instagram. I think it's an incredible platform. I think it's one of the best ways to relate to everybody, meaning just how we connected. Coaches in developing a network, teachers, parents, students are on there. Obviously, you got to be careful with the student interaction, but being able to interact with everybody through social media is a big piece. Coach_Garrish on Instagram, John_Garrish on Twitter. Those are probably the best ways to get in contact with me. As far as new projects, I mean, I don't think there's anything crazy. There's a big need regardless. I think all high school coaches are kind of fighting the fight of getting positions created for other people that can do what we do. I think that's a big piece, and I think locally especially, as I mentioned, kind of to kick it off, Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade, I think are some of the most talent dense and talent rich areas from an athletic standpoint and other ways. Putting people in positions to lead some of those students that go array and don't necessarily end up on the path that they could. I think I'm not one to sort of underwhelm or under exaggerate our impact on kids.
Yeah.
I think you put the right person in the right situation, and they will impact every person that they come across.
Yeah.
And I think anytime we give somebody the opportunity to do that, and more importantly, give kids the opportunity to learn from people like that, is completely necessary. So again, one of the things kind of that I like to do, if anyone's listening from South Florida, like I want to connect with coaches in South Florida because I want to know how to support and create a resource that is beneficial to the South Florida high school coach.
Yeah.
I love coaches everywhere. I love kids everywhere, more importantly. But I like South Florida has always been, it's home to me.
Yeah.
I grew up as a kid in South Florida. I saw a lot of my friends that didn't necessarily go on the right path. And again, if they would have just had an adult figure in their life that said, hey, that's not the way.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it's not always just the adult. It's like incredible things happen in the weight room.
Yeah.
And it's much, much, much bigger than getting under a bar and putting an extra 5 pounds on it. Incredible things happen in the weight room. So the more that we create the opportunities for young 14 to 18-year-old kids, I think the better off, not just down here we'll be in South Florida, but moving forward to athletes, to society, because athletics is a major, major piece of our society, obviously.
For sure. Awesome.
So that's a big thing. I know that's not a huge project. I mean, it is a huge project.
Yeah, I was about to say,
It's not necessarily something that there's a name on that we're so if any, I guess the best way to kind of connect on that is if any coaches in South Florida or really any coaches that maybe have ties down here, if we can just connect, I think that's a big piece of it. Continue to connect. And for college coaches, like, again, college coaches might have the funding that there's probably, like I said, there's, to create a position at every high school in the country. We're a ways away from that. It'd be incredible if that happened. But I'd be willing to bet just about every school in the country has somebody that would be beneficial for those kids to be around in a weight room experience. Now, there's ways that we have to go about credentials and certification and things like that. It's a whole nother point and a whole nother conversation. But empowering coaches like that, like, you never, just like I said, you never know the impact that you can make as a high school quarterback on campus. You never know the impact. Like, coaches, whether good or bad, logos are pretty darn cool. So you see a logo and you say, hey, that coach is from so and so. They're coming to visit us and help us out and be a resource for us. Coaches really, and kids especially, if you support their coaches there and they see you coming by or they see you kind of supporting what they're doing, is a big piece. So I guess from a high school coach saying to a college coach, making use of that opportunity that sometimes we fight against. We say on the logo case, but we could also use it on the flip side and kind of be a benefit for those coaches that maybe are on the outside looking in, saying, you know what, wait a second, a coach from the University of Miami is coming by and telling me that this is an opportunity, this is something that we can do on campus. That's something that's really supportive for coaches. So you find too, if we're and sorry for going off on a tangent about this. If we're hosting a clinic or a conference, especially in South Florida, I can just speak from experience. One of those college coaches on board, and all of a sudden, a lot of people will come. So there is certainly some weight to that.
Okay. Awesome, Coach. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic. Really great conversation. I love your energy. I love what you do, and hopefully we connect again soon in the future.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for the opportunity to just share and talk about what we're working on with our kids and share a little bit about them. So it's very meaningful. It's important to me, and I really appreciate the opportunity.